Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on Periscope and Facebook Live Mentions. I'm Katie Underwood, Chatelane's Associate Editor, and I'm here with Sarah Boesveld, who is our senior writer and roving reporter. She's spent 8 days recently in court covering the Ghomeshi trial for us. So welcome, Sarah. Thanks for being here. I wanted to start off by asking you, I know from being in the office, a lot of us were really glued to your Twitter feed for the 8 days that the trial was transpiring. And I'm wondering why you think this trial in particular has caught the nation's attention so fiercely.
Yeah, it's been interesting because it was over a year ago that Jian Ghomeshi was charged with 5 charges, well, 4 of them sexual assault charges, and the last overcome is suspect choking. And we heard and then we actually have another sexual assault charge coming in June. But I think this entire past year has really put a lot of attention on the conversations about sexual violence that we're having. It's maintained, it's sustained itself, and Jian Ghomeshi being such a presence in our Canadian media landscape and on the radios of so many people, at home, fans of Q, that whole narrative has just been really gripping for people. And so I think to see a trial that had a lot of build-up, really high-powered lawyers that he had hired to defend him, and also just an opportunity to really be inside the courtroom. We've not really done Twitter in a meaningful way, in such a high-profile, lengthy way, and just it lets the public be in there a little bit more actively, and they can actually see the way that somebody who comes forward with a complaint about sexual violence is actually sort of treated in court. How does that process work? Why? What kind of questions are they asked? How do things like, what were you wearing? What did you do after the assault? How did you process this, or what do you remember? All of that was just in full public view for all of us to see in real time. It's pretty stunning.
Yeah, so in addition to writing legal primers for us and doing sort of daily recaps of what transpired in court, you were also live tweeting the whole time, as you mentioned. One of the readers, Irish Riley 68, is curious, did you use a phone to tweet?
My thumbs. People are tweeting at me saying, thanks for the coverage and being so quick. Are your thumbs okay? No, I used a laptop though, and I was using TweetDeck, just typing very quickly. And when I'm doing interviews anyway, on the phone, if I'm at a computer, I'm often typing along when people talk, and so I've acquired the skill of listening and typing at the same time and taking notes, and that's experience as a reporter that you just get through practice. So I'm listening, but I'm also having to stop and be like, okay, did I get that full quote down accurately? I won't use it unless it is accurate in quotations. Am I getting the context? And I have to keep up because it's court, you're building arguments, right? So you have to follow the line of that argument and make sure that you end up on the other side of it so that people get what the point was if they're scrolling through and watching it. So,
yeah.
And you know what, the tools that those lawyers were using to sort of make those arguments were really compelling to people, and they really did want to see it play out in real time. And there were people saying, look, this is, I haven't sort of been as closely attuned to a court case since I watched Street Legal years ago, So I think for a lot of people too, there was a real time watching and feeling like you're in the courtroom. Great to know about the process, but also pretty compelling, narratives playing out there too that people are really engaged in.
Yeah, and I think it has, we talked about this, Rachel Kiza, our editor at large, wrote a piece about this. It sort of ignited a debate about the merits and value of live tweeting something like this, because obviously it's a very it's a lot of difficult content, and it seems that the discussion around it has said, is this too voyeuristic? Are we exposing something that should be better left to the courts? What are your feelings on that?
Well, I think in this digital age, we have an expectation of a lot more democracy in general. Access is so important, and knowing about things as they're happening is so important. But there are a lot of provisions in a courtroom that are there for a reason. Publication bans, for example. We need to protect the identity and privacy of people that are in that court system. And so, you have to balance some of those principles essentially, and demands as well. And so, but if I was writing this in, maybe 10 years ago, and a lot of the reporters there did did it this way. You just listen, take notes, and then process it yourself and filter it yourself, and then write your piece at the end of the day. But nowadays people want to be much more engaged, and certainly on something so high profile and of issues of such importance to this country at this moment. I think it was really an important, accessible way for people. But yeah, it's a lot of information, and you have to synthesize that as you go. So it was sort of a balancing act of having to do both for me. But the voyeurism thing, I think people ask me too, like, should you put like a trigger warning on your tweets or whatnot? It's like, well, you're following the Jian Ghomeshi trial. You know that these are sexual assault charges, and a lot of us already know those details of the narratives, and it is difficult to watch these witnesses go through that vigorous cross-examination, but it was also a really good public education tool. I think that way to see it play out on Twitter, because you get that back and forth. You can see how they build their argument and how they get to their point for the judge.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note too, a lot of people who aren't legal experts, because they had this access, can sort of get a sense of how it was going. Like not in a legal sense, not debating the value of arguments, but I think a lot of columnists especially have talked about how the case for the complainant sort of unraveled, and how Jian Ghomeshi's lawyer Marie Henin was sort of lacking being the term used to like aggressively question the credibility of the complainants in a sexual assault case. I'm wondering, is it too premature to sort of weigh in on how the case went? You were there, maybe you can speak to this with more authority than the broader discourse.
Sure. Well, when people ask me sort of how, how's it going in there, my answer about all the complainants was that, Marie Henin is very good at her job. She's an extremely good defense attorney, top of the country, and so I think. But at the same time, I would also answer that I think the complainants did as best as they could, given the sort of grilling that they were under, given the fact that they had to remember something that happened 10 years ago, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But but it did seem that they weren't as well prepared as they could have been.
Yeah, and there does seem to be this lingering misunderstanding about the fact that, the Crown, who is the prosecutor, is not the complainant's lawyer.
No, really not. And a lot of people were really surprised about that at the time, when the first complainant was on the stand. They did all have their own lawyers, but they have to get their own lawyers and get, pay for their own lawyers, or be lucky enough to have pro bono, which is something you would get in a high-profile case, sure.
Yeah.
But your average person is really not going to get that. It's very rare to have your own lawyer. But even if you do have your own lawyer, there's no standing for them in court, no legal standing. So they can't stand up and object to the way that this person, their client is being questioned, if things are being sort of, like evidence is being raised that's sort of unfair or so on and so forth. Like there's nothing they can do. So in terms of, changing the system or doing anything to sort of better prepare survivors coming forward, I think I know Kathleen Wynn's action plan in Ontario was trying to get more sort of access to legal advice for women who come forward with these complaints, and just so they know how to, they know like sort of strategies that'll be used. The other disconcerting thing in this case was all the emails and all of the messages and that sort of trail that Henin and her team used to undermine the credibility. And really these witnesses were learning as they went, or seemed to be learning as they went, and that's why they're sort of providing new information along the trail too.
Right.
That last the day before the testimony for the witness number 3, that's when she came forward and said, look, I did have a sexual encounter with Jian Ghomeshi. I didn't tell you that. I didn't think it was relevant. We all think it has to do just with the incident. It has to do with so much more than that. And that's what we learned a lot about in this case.
It's also brought up, this question of what a sexual assault survivor looks like, how they should behave in the aftermath of something like that. And, there was a lot of questioning of, why would you continue to see someone who allegedly assaulted you? And it must not have actually happened if, they're continuing to engage with this person. Maybe you can speak to, debunking those sort of myths and how this has brought up another conversation about that.
Yeah, it totally plays into that whole, perfect victim thing. Like we have to have for all of our narratives to be so neat and tidy, we need to have everyone in their defined roles. And what we really saw with these cases was, yes, you can still write someone a letter after, that does express some, feelings for somebody, send them flowers, Lucy has sort of a quirky approach to her relationships in general. I think, I sort of have interviewed her before and talked about her sort of in terms of the way she engages with people, and then also just, you have to remember everything. You have to completely cut off contact. Like, that's something we are learning a lot about in terms of how, survivors process things. There's a lot of self-blame. Did I do something? We heard a lot about that in court. We heard a lot about, thinking that they might ruin someone else's prospects if they come forward, concerned about other people for sure. And also just, we expect everybody to know exactly how the system works and, how you should have known that this would have been used against you, or you should have known that, that email you sent 10 years ago that you don't remember sending, like, how could you forget that, But, to be fair to the critics too, there was a year before people knew that they were going to be on the stand, and so it does speak to some of the systemic concerns about preparation, and what the limitations are there for people to have. And yeah, again, most people don't have a lawyer.
Yeah.
There's victim witness programs and services for people, but that's mostly just like, here's the courtroom, here's where you have to stand, here's generally what you might be asked, but
yeah,
it doesn't go further than that.
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap up here in a second, but this is certainly not a softball question to end on, but do you think that the trial in some way will be illuminating and lead to some sort of legal reform? Is it a positive first step? Not positive, obviously, but can something be gleaned from this?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of discussion over the past few days as the case has wound down, and we're going to await a verdict on March 24th. I think people have said, look, and the way Marie Henein finished her case, closed her case, was like, this is the justice system we have. It is the best tool possible to, determine innocence or guilt. But I think this case really showed us a lot about how witnesses are treated, certainly complainants coming forward. People saying, I don't think that people will want to come forward now, seeing what a rigorous cross-examination you go through, and given that there is no such thing as a perfect complainant in any case. But I think there will be more scrutiny on how that navigation process goes for people, and how whether something like whacking can really be allowed. There's been conversation about that beforehand, but now it's like we really saw it.
In action.
Certainly, yeah. No, she's almost too smart to use whacking in some ways, right? Like she did it in more covert ways, but we also have to remember that people who bring these complaints are not always going to have Marie Henein to contend with, but they are going to have very good lawyers, and they all use the same strategies, and so certainly more education on the part of judges too on how people process these things, and what the Crown can use at its disposal. It's a public office, right? Taxpayers pay for the Crown's prosecution office. So, do we want to have reforms that people are actually willing to pay for to sort of enlighten that legal system? It's a good example. It's not the perfect case for this, for reform, but it's a start.
Yeah. Definitely shines the spotlight on it.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to wrap things up. Our thanks to Sarah for being here, and if you want to read more of her thorough coverage on the Jian Ghomeshi trial, you can go to Chatelaine.com.